In 1895, a mining crew tunneling through the Rockies near Aspen, Colorado, stopped work. They'd hit something that wasn't rock. Long femur bones, massive skulls, rib cages so large a grown man could crawl through them. The foreman sent word to Denver. Within 48 hours, researchers from the Smithsonian arrived, cordoned off the site, and loaded everything onto rail cars headed east. The miners were paid double wages to keep quiet. Local newspapers ran one story, then nothing. The bones disappeared into museum storage, never to be catalogued or displayed. Official records state the tunnel breakthrough happened without incident. But 3 of those miners kept diaries, and what they described changes everything we think we know about who built the infrastructure we still use today. If you're watching this, you're already asking questions most people won't touch. Hit subscribe. This channel goes where the approved narrative fears to tread. I cover the economic anomalies, the engineering impossibilities, and the buried evidence every single week. Now, here's what those diaries actually said. The Ute Pass Tunnel project was a critical link in the Colorado Midland Railway's expansion through the Rockies. The route had been surveyed multiple times. Geologists confirmed solid granite for most of the bore. Standard drilling and blasting should have taken 18 months. Instead, the crew finished in 9. Why? Because for nearly 400 feet, they weren't cutting through mountain. They were clearing out an existing passage. A passage lined with cut stone blocks, perfectly fitted, no mortar. Just precision joinery that modern engineers still can't replicate without laser guidance systems. Foreman Samuel Caldwell wrote in his diary that the blocks were warm to the touch, even 200 feet underground in February. The stone wasn't local granite. It was a polished black basalt that doesn't exist anywhere in Colorado's geological record. Each block weighed an estimated 4 to 6 tons. They were fitted so precisely that a knife blade couldn't slip between them. This wasn't a natural cave. This was construction. And the bones they found weren't scattered. They were arranged, deliberately placed in alcoves carved into the tunnel walls, like the passage itself was a tomb. The skeletons measured between 9 and 12 feet tall. Caldwell counted 6 complete specimens and partial remains of at least 4 more. The skulls showed elongated craniums with pronounced brow ridges and double rows of teeth. The femurs were proportionally longer than modern human anatomy, suggesting these beings had a different gait, possibly adapted for high altitude or rough terrain. What disturbed the miners most wasn't the size, it was the context. These weren't prehistoric remains buried by geological time. The bones showed tool marks, deliberate shaping, engraving. These people had been prepared for burial with the same care we'd expect from a civilization that valued its dead. One miner, Thomas Garrett, sketched what he saw in remarkable detail. His drawings show femurs measuring 28 inches, compared to the average modern human femur of 18 inches. The skulls had eye sockets positioned slightly wider apart than normal, and cranial capacity that Garrett estimated to be nearly double that of contemporary humans. He noted that the rib cages were proportioned differently, suggesting a larger lung capacity. These weren't deformed humans. They were anatomically distinct, a separate branch of something that doesn't exist in our evolutionary charts. The burial chamber itself defied explanation. The alcoves were carved at precise intervals, each exactly 7 feet deep and 12 feet high. The floor was covered in crushed mica that still held a faint shimmer even after centuries underground. At the far end of the chamber, the miners found what Caldwell described as a throne of stone, a massive seat carved from a single piece of granite with armrests positioned too far apart for a normal human frame. Garrett measured it. The seat was 4 feet wide. The backrest stood 9 feet tall. Whoever sat there wasn't just taller. They were built on an entirely different scale. But here's where it gets interesting. The miners also found artifacts. Bronze tools that showed no oxidation despite the moisture in the tunnel. Ceramic vessels with glyphs that didn't match any known Native American language system. And a series of copper plates covered in what Caldwell described as mathematical symbols and star charts. He sketched several of these symbols in his diary. In 1972, a researcher at the University of Colorado matched those sketches to surveying marks found on pre-Columbian sites across South America, sites officially dated to 500 AD, sites that shouldn't have any connection to Colorado mining tunnels from the 1890s, unless both were built by the same people. At the same time, using the same engineering system. The Smithsonian took everything: bones, artifacts, even the cut stone blocks they could pry loose. The official expedition report, filed in 1896, describes the find as anomalous mineral deposits of no historical significance. That's it. No mention of skeletons. No mention of construction. No photographs, no measurements, no follow-up. The lead researcher, Dr. Horace Whitman, published extensively on southwestern archaeology for the next 20 years. He never mentioned the Ute Pass discovery once, but his estate records, made public in 1954, show he received payments from a private foundation linked to industrial railway interests. Payments totaling over $50,000 in 1890s money. That's nearly $2 million today. For silence. Why would railway companies pay to bury evidence of ancient construction inside the mountains they were drilling through? Because if the public knew those tunnels were already there, already engineered, already functional, the entire economic model of westward expansion collapses. Railroads received massive federal land grants and subsidies to open up the frontier. They sold themselves as pioneers, bringing civilization to untamed wilderness. But what if the infrastructure was already there? What if they were just repurposing, rebranding, and claiming credit for engineering that existed long before the United States was even founded? You don't get government contracts for discovering something. You get them for building something. So the discovery had to disappear. And this wasn't isolated. Between 1885 and 1910, mining operations across Colorado, Nevada, and Utah reported similar finds. Giant skeletons in carved tunnels, advanced metallurgy, astronomical alignings. Every single report followed the same pattern. Initial discovery, brief local coverage, Smithsonian involvement, and then silence. A 1909 article in the Arizona Gazette detailed a massive underground city found in the Grand Canyon, complete with mummies, copper tools, and hieroglyphs. The Smithsonian denied the expedition ever happened, except researchers have found the budget allocation, the personnel records, the supply manifests. It happened. They just decided you weren't supposed to know. Here's the economic angle most people miss. The Gilded Age railroad boom depended on one narrative, that America was a blank slate waiting for progress. Investors, both domestic and foreign, poured billions into companies promising to conquer the wilderness. But if that wilderness was already conquered, already inhabited, already built, the investment model falls apart. Worse, it raises legal questions. If advanced civilizations existed here before European contact, what happens to manifest destiny? What happens to mineral rights? What happens to the land grants that made railroad barons richer than kings? You can't claim virgin territory if someone else was there first, so the evidence had to be erased. Not destroyed, just removed from public access. Locked away where it couldn't challenge the official story. The architectural evidence is still there, if you know where to look. The Ute Pass tunnel was sealed in 1918 after a supposed cave-in. Official records say it was unstable. But the tunnel had been operational for 23 years without incident. Geology surveys from 1920 show no evidence of structural failure. The closure happened 3 months after a group of historians requested access to study pre-Columbian engineering. The timing is not coincidental. Today, the tunnel entrance is buried under a rock slide that looks suspiciously deliberate. Metal detectors pick up massive iron content in the debris. Not natural, not random. Controlled demolition designed to look like an accident. Other sites tell the same story. The Creed Silver Mine in southern Colorado hit a chamber in 1892 that workers described as a hall of giants. Stone furniture, massive doorways, skeletons measuring over 10 feet. The mine owner, David Moffat, was also a railroad financier. He shut down that section of the mine permanently, calling it a gas pocket hazard. Miners who talked were fired. Those who persisted had accidents. Within 5 years, every man who'd been in that chamber was either dead or had left the state. The mine continued operation for another 40 years, but that section stayed sealed. When the mine finally closed in 1985, the company filled the shafts with concrete. Not cave-ins, deliberate concrete pours, 40 feet deep. You don't do that for safety. You do that for secrecy. The technology described in those mining diaries shouldn't exist. Not in 1895, and not in whatever ancient era these tunnels supposedly come from. Caldwell mentioned ventilation shafts that created constant airflow without any visible source. Lighting alcoves that seemed designed for something other than torches or oil lamps. The polished basalt blocks were cut with precision that requires diamond-tipped saws and computer-guided machinery. We couldn't replicate that level of accuracy until the 1970s. So either a civilization with advanced technology existed in North America thousands of years ago, or something even stranger is going on. Either way, it's not in your history textbook. The Tartaria connection is unavoidable. Photographs from the 1800s show massive, ornate buildings across the American West that official history claims were built in months by frontier towns with populations under 1,000. The architecture matches building styles found in Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and Russia, styles that predate European colonization of the Americas by centuries. Mining towns in Colorado, specifically, had courthouses, opera houses, and train stations that rivaled anything in Boston or Philadelphia, and they appeared almost overnight. The standard explanation is that boomtown wealth paid for rapid construction. But the math doesn't work. The workforce wasn't there. The materials weren't there. The expertise wasn't there, unless the buildings were already there, repurposed, rebranded, claimed. Take Aspen's Wheeler Opera House, completed in 1889. Official records say it took 7 months to build, but the foundation shows weathering inconsistent with new construction. The ornamental work includes architectural details that require master craftsmen, not frontier carpenters. The acoustic design of the hall rivals European opera houses that took decades to perfect. Similar anomalies appear in Leadville, Telluride, and Ouray. Buildings that supposedly went up during silver rushes show construction techniques and materials that don't match the timeline. Stone that had to be quarried, transported, and carved. Ironwork forged with precision that requires industrial facilities. Yet these towns had populations barely scraping 2,000, most of them transient miners living in tents. The labor pool for such projects simply didn't exist. Then there's the question of financing. A frontier opera house cost an estimated $80,000 to $100,000 in 1880s money. That's roughly $2.5 million today. For a town where the average miner made $3 a day, even if the wealthiest mine owner dumped his entire fortune into construction, the timeline doesn't work. Foundations alone would take months. Masonry work on that scale requires skilled labor you couldn't find in a mining camp. And yet, building after building appeared within the same narrow window across the West. As if someone flipped a switch and entire cities manifested. The official story calls it prosperity. The evidence suggests something else entirely. Think about it. If you're a railroad company arriving in a region that already has functional tunnels, bridges, and infrastructure, what do? You don't announce that the indigenous people or whoever came before had engineering that rivals your own. You take credit. You rebrand. You tell investors you built it. You file patents. You print maps showing your roots. And when you find evidence that contradicts the story, you bury it. Literally, because the entire economic system of the industrial age depends on the myth of progress. The idea that we are always moving forward, always improving, always more advanced than those who came before. Evidence of a prior advanced civilization destroys that myth. And myths are worth protecting when trillions of dollars depend on them. The Smithsonian's role in all of this is well documented but rarely discussed. Since its founding in 1846, the institution has been the gatekeeper of American historical narrative. What gets displayed, what gets stored, what gets lost. Researchers have been trying for decades to access the museum's off-site storage facilities. Requests are denied. FOIA requests return nothing. Insiders who've spoken anonymously describe warehouses full of artifacts that contradict accepted timelines. Giant skeletons, advanced tools, metallurgy that shouldn't exist. All catalogued, all stored, all hidden. Why? Because the Smithsonian isn't just a museum. It's a narrative control mechanism. It decides what history is. And history, as it turns out, is too important to leave to the truth. The miners who found those skeletons didn't ask for trouble. They were working men trying to make a living, but they saw something that didn't fit. And instead of investigating, instead of celebrating a monumental discovery, the system buried it, paid them off, erased the records, filled the tunnels with concrete, because controlling the past means controlling the present. If people knew that advanced civilizations existed in North America long before Columbus, long before the Mayflower, long before Manifest Destiny, the entire foundation of American exceptionalism crumbles. And with it, the economic and political structures built on that myth. So the bones sit in storage, the tunnels stay sealed, the diaries gather dust in private collections, and the official story remains unchallenged, except by people like you. People who notice that the story doesn't add up. People who ask why there are so many gaps, so many inconsistencies, so many convenient coincidences. The evidence is still out there. It's just not where they told you to look. The Colorado Rockies hide more than gold and silver. They hide proof that we are not the first advanced civilization on this continent. They hide engineering that we still can't explain. They hide skeletons that rewrite everything we think we know about human history. And they hide the fact that the people in power have always known. They just decided you didn't need to. Next week, I'm breaking down the 1909 Grand Canyon discovery and why the Smithsonian's denial doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you want to see how this connects to the Tartaria mud flood evidence across the Midwest, that video is on screen now. Click it.